Hey there folks, this video is a bit overdue, but I wasn't really sure how I wanted to structure it. Last year, a new documentary came out on Netflix that centered around the Yuba County Five, and it contained some interesting ideas. I received quite a few emails asking me what I thought about it, and it's taken a while to get around to it. So this video will partly be a discussion of the information revealed in that documentary, but also an analysis of some of the theories that were presented in it. For those who don't know, it was about an hour long and featured as an independent episode of a series called Files of the Unexplained. If you have already watched my series on the subject, then you probably didn't hear too many new revelations, but they did get interviews with many family members of the five men who disappeared. Personally, I was always looking forward to hearing what they had to say, and I knew the documentary crew had been working on this for quite some time. The family really gave us a lot of good background on the Yuba boys, what they were like and so on, and also a few clarifications when it came to their behavior. Before watching this video, it might be beneficial if you have seen the Netflix documentary I'm talking about, but it's probably not all that necessary because I'll bring up and explain everything that I think is important to discuss. I'm also not going to do any rehashing of the case timeline like I did in the last video. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you know something about the Yuba County 5 case. So I suppose this video isn't really for a Yuba County 5 beginner. Alright, with all that said, let's move on to the recently released documentary, what new information is in it, and also where it falls short of expectations. I know a lot of people, myself included, were confused that Joseph Shones wasn't even mentioned once. So I'm just going to start going through topics and important information that comes up throughout the movie in chronological order. The first little nugget came from Jackie Hewitt's brother. He says that Jackie didn't have a problem using a telephone and would talk to his girlfriend for long periods of time. This information matters because the official sheriff's report makes mention that Jackie either couldn't or wouldn't use telephones. This is further relevant because there were a few sightings of the Yuba Five in the weeks and months following their disappearance. One of the more important ones occurred on March 3rd of 1978 at a place called Mary's Country Store, where a witness said she saw the boys getting out of a reddish truck. When she brought this information to the sheriff and she was making identifications of the boys, she said she saw someone who looked like Jackie Hewitt using a payphone. Originally, it was thought that this sighting lacked legitimacy because Jackie couldn't or didn't use telephones, but as it turns out, he can. Obviously, this doesn't mean it was actually the Yuba boys at Mary's Country Store that day, but it does help remove an inaccuracy and perhaps lend a little more credence to this sighting. Another point that is worthy to hammer home is that the family that is interviewed in the film seem to all agree that there was no way the boys missed a turn and accidentally wound up in the mountains. One even states that Jack Madruga had made the drive 100 times. Probably an exaggeration, but his point is well made. They knew the way home. I always felt this was true as well. If you do that drive up into the mountains, there are countless times and opportunities for you to say, hey, this doesn't look familiar, or this doesn't make sense. I mean, you have the town of Oroville, the Bidwell Bar Bridge, and then a narrow mountain road leading up into the snowy mountains. There were 1,000 signs that would have been apparent to them, and there were countless opportunities to turn around, but they didn't. Now, that really only leaves two options. One, they fully intended to go up into the mountains, or at least they fully intended to divert from their known path home. It could be possible that they wanted to make a stop somewhere in a region that they were unfamiliar with and for reasons that we don't know, and then they became lost. It's possible. The alternative for that would be that someone, somehow, forced them to drive up into the hills, and that one is quite a bit trickier. It would seem rather unlikely that there was anyone other than the five boys in the car, because it was packed pretty tight as it is. Could another car chase or force them up into the hills? I don't know. It seemed unlikely as well because this mystery car would have had to be chasing them for well over an hour, so they would have had some really determined pursuers. And if they were being chased, why not stop for help in the town of Oroville? The Montego's undercarriage was also completely undamaged, despite the rough road leading into the mountains. So while Jack Madruga was driving, he was driving carefully. Would that really be the case if someone was chasing them? It's hard to know how they would react to a situation like that, But again, I think these 5 men had a lot more intelligence than people like to give them credit for, and there were 5 of them. So combined, you would think that they could come to a reasonable solution to solve whatever problem they had found themselves in. That is, if they were being chased. If they made their way into the mountains on purpose for reasons that we simply cannot know, then that is a different story. Ultimately, the documentary helps to give us a fuller picture by really debunking any idea that the boys could have simply gotten lost and ended up there. It's also clear from listening to the families speak that they place a lot of blame on the authorities for the lack of results from the search. There were at least 2 men surviving, or rather starving, for many weeks in a trailer owned by the Forest Service. The search brought personnel to locations that wouldn't have been very far from the trailers, but nobody in the end made the decision to go and actually look. It gets worse when you consider that the Forest Service says they informed the Butte County Sheriff's Office of those trailers and basically suggested they go and take a look at them. But for some reason, that never happened. The family openly criticized this failure in newspapers back in the day, and Butte County probably either denies this was the situation, or perhaps they give themselves the excuse that it was unthinkable that the boys could have walked that far in the snow and the cold without proper clothing. You can almost understand why they would think that. I mean, we're talking about a distance of almost 20 miles, and I believe the evidence shows that 3 of the men did die while trying to get to that trailer, but at least 2 survived, and with severe injury. And with all the searching the authorities did without success, you would think the first thing you would do would be to seek out any place that could be used as a potential shelter. It is, without a doubt, a massive failure on the part of the Butte County Sheriff. Another interesting tidbit comes from the Hewitt family regarding Jack Hewitt Sr. Hewitt Sr. was heavily involved in the search efforts and was even the one who ended up finding the remains of his own son along the forest road. There has always been a lot of, how best to say this, differing information that came from Hewitt Sr. For example, in the documentary, his family says that he witnessed only 4 sets of tracks leaving the Montego and heading north up into the hills. Their thinking was that Matthias was never up there in the first place, having been killed earlier in the night and thrown off a bridge. Hewitt Sr. also claimed to have witnessed riding in the trailer that was a match for his son, meaning he believed Jackie Hewitt actually made it to the trailer and survived there for quite some time. He claimed that the authorities basically ignored him when he pointed this out. It's also mentioned in the documentary that Hewitt Sr. knew about the forest trailers and even told searchers to go and check them. The response he got was that the boys would never make it that far. A lot of this points to the idea that authorities were ignoring evidence and just wanted to have this case over and done with. I'm sure a lot of people see it that way too, but it is a bit more nuanced than that. You have multiple agencies working on this case. You had the Yuba County Sheriff, the Butte County Sheriff, Plumas County, and more I'm not thinking of. These agencies all helped in the search. It was Butte County, not Yuba County, that seemingly ignored the advice from the Forest Service to go out and check their trailers. Frankly, given that Hewitt Sr. worked tirelessly to search those hills by himself, if he felt his child had made it to those trailers, then I'm surprised he didn't try to go there himself. But anyway, I'm bringing all this up to say that I don't think it is true that all of the authorities simply did not care. For some of them, I'm sure that's probably true. But Lance Ayers, who was the lead detective on this case for Yuba County, really seemed to genuinely care about solving this thing. This case haunted him for years until his death. I doubt he ever stopped thinking about it. His dedication to solving it comes through when you read the Yuba County case file. We have a lot of detailed information because Yuba County really worked this case. I've seen what it looks like when an investigative agency shirks their duties and doesn't investigate. It does not look like this. I have a hard time believing that someone as invested as Lance Ayers would simply ignore evidence like only 4 sets of footprints in the snow or Jackie Hewitt's handwriting being found in the trailer. If this stuff existed, then I would have little doubt that he would have included it in his reports. It would be really relevant stuff. I'll add one other point to this. The 4 sets of footprints in the snow thing makes little sense to me, mainly because we know for a fact that people went up into those mountains after the boys went missing. People who wanted to ski, people who wanted to play in the snow, the people who went up to get Sean's car, and who knows what else. Both cars and people were in that area destroying tracks and traces for days after the boys went missing. To top it all off, it apparently snowed the day before the Mercury Montego was found. The point is, if there had been obvious tracks leading somewhere, I think it's a given that someone, either a searcher or a family member, would have followed them to their natural conclusion, and in doing so, the boys would have been found a lot sooner. Obviously, that did not happen, and I have to think it was because there were no actual clear tracks present in the area. Tracks in snow are usually the first thing you look for and the easiest way to track somebody's movement. If they existed, they would have been important and noted. Personally, I doubt there were any tracks, as a snowcat had come up the road and likely flattened all the snow. You don't leave very good tracks when you're walking on packed snow. I hate to question the validity of anything a family member has to say, but I just don't see how these things that Hewitt Sr. said he saw could have actually been real. The documentary goes on to pose some interesting questions that have been brought up before about the events that took place at the trailer. Why did they not find the additional food that was locked up? Why didn't they turn on the gas heating system so they could be warm? I think these questions might have relatively simple answers, but we also lack information, so that makes it a bit more complicated. Obviously, the two men who made it to the trailers were scavenging after they got there because they broke into the trailer. That's clear from the photographs. They broke a window and climbed through. And of course they did. They were likely on the verge of death. There was evidence that they also used a pry bar to break a padlock. Doing this, they broke into a storage locker that had cans of food, and those cans were found empty and consumed on the floor of the trailer. So we know that they were looking for and found supplies. They were doing the smart thing that anyone should do in that situation, searching for resources to keep themselves alive. When it comes to the additional food locker that was left untouched, I've always wondered what the lock on it looked like. Was it larger? Was it more difficult to break into? Did it exhaust the men just trying to break in and get the food from the first locker? Did they believe perhaps that the food would have been all in one place, so that essentially they thought the food they found was all that there was? These all lead to possible answers. With the gas heating system, you have to wonder, if they saw a large gas tank, would they automatically assume it is used for the purposes of indoor heating? Was turning the system on really as simple as pushing a button or turning a valve? Did they think the tank was even full, or did they assume that it was empty because the trailer camp appeared abandoned? The best way to help sort out these questions would have been to do a detailed walkthrough of the forest trailer camp, which no longer exists. You have to see how these things work and then imagine what it would all look like under many feet of snow. Would it even be visible to them at that time? It's easy to read a piece of paper that says there was food and gas available at the site, and then for us to wonder why they didn't find and use it. But it's a whole other matter to wander into a seemingly abandoned camp that's buried in snow, and then try to figure out what resources are there that could be helpful to you. Mind you, whoever made it to the forest camp was likely in terrible shape. Frostbite, hypothermia, exhaustion, confusion, all things that prevent you from thinking clearly. If you follow this channel, then you've heard stories of ridiculous things that people have done while hypothermic. When it comes to the two men who made it to the trailer, more than anything, I would imagine they just wanted to get out of the weather, to have a place to rest that wasn't under an open sky. In the documentary, Ted Weir's family proposed that he would not have done anything that he felt was stealing, like taking food that didn't belong to him. They mentioned this in reference to the food storage locker that was left untouched, but it kind of ignores the fact that places were already broken into. Food already did get taken and eaten, among other supplies. So whatever morality Ted Weir had in his day-to-day life, some of it likely went out the window due to the life or death situation he was in. And this would hold true for pretty much anyone in a similar situation. Ted's family also mentions that he wouldn't have known how to turn on the propane, and this might very well be true, but it seems unlikely that Ted Weir was involved much in the collection of any of the camp's resources. He likely struggled to make it to the camp in the first place, and once there, he probably got into that bunk bed and stayed there until his death. I think it is much more likely that Gary Mathias was the one to take the food and use it to keep them both alive, at least for a time. And while we're still on the subject of what the men did or did not do while at the trailer, it's worth bringing up the idea of creating a fire for warmth. I know some folks don't see it this way, but to me, I still have not seen evidence or mention of a wood-burning fireplace in the trailer. Today we have a few new pictures that actually show some of the interior of the trailer, and none of them show a fireplace. Not to say that one wasn't there, of course, but let's say there was one. Why wouldn't they make a fire to stay warm? For me, I wonder how much access they had to dry wood, or at least did they know where to find dry wood? Remember, this area is covered in snow at this point. On the topic of staying warm, you might also ask, why didn't they try to seal up the large window they broke to get in? The wind that must have blown in there was likely freezing, but they didn't do anything about it. Well, if Weir is disabled because of the condition of his feet, then in my opinion, we just have to contend with why Mathias didn't do anything. Both of these men were likely sapped of their strength after the near 20-mile walk in the snow. Surely they were unbelievably exhausted. But over the course of roughly 70 days, or the amount of time it took for Ted Weir to pass away, you would think that something would have been done to create warmth. Except there wasn't. So we have some strange behavior and Gary Mathias. You do wonder to what extent his schizophrenia affected him while he was trapped in that trailer. Could it be the reason nothing was done? It's hard to say. Speaking of Gary Mathias, we need to talk about him. The film brings up the popular theory that Gary was somehow responsible for whatever happened that night. One of the family members says that the boys were scared of Mathias, and that they didn't want him to go with them to the game in Chico. It's something to note, but it's impossible to prove. I mean, these guys did let him into their friend group, and Gary had been behaving well for the time that they had known him according to reports. The idea that Gary somehow coaxed the four boys up into the mountains that night is a bit far-fetched. I mean, each of these guys was their own person. They weren't just some lemming that you could just boss around. Jack Madruga loved his car more than anything. It's doubtful you could talk him into driving into those mountains without a damn good reason. All of them had a big basketball game the next morning, which means all of them were likely eager to get home, go to sleep, and get up to tackle the next day. All of the boys knew that their parents were expecting them to return home at a reasonable hour. Gary Mathias is, and always has been, an easy scapegoat. He suffered from schizophrenia and drug addiction, which led to him committing some heinous crimes in the past. But again, those crimes occurred while he was basically in the midst of a psychotic break. Since that time, he had been taking medication that kept him stable and a functional member of society. I don't think there is any scenario in which Gary Mathias is the sole instigator for whatever happened that night. I just cannot imagine a situation where he talks the men into driving up into the mountains, and then they get their car stuck, and then he talks them into walking further up into the snowy hills and to certain death. Gary's brother defends him in the documentary, saying that there is no way his father would have let Gary leave the house without taking his medication. And while on this medication, he had been well behaved. All of this leads into the next item. Jack Madruga's niece, Kathy Roberts, she states that after the boys' disappearance and discovery, after the searching was all over, she saw Gary Mathias in a bar one night. She says she locked eyes with him and swears it was Gary. She ran to tell her mother, and the two were going to call the sheriff's department, but the man she believed was Gary got up and left. She backs this story up by saying that Gary was seen by other folks at different locations around town. I had heard about this story before, but I didn't include it in my other videos because it is just an unverified sighting. These literally happen in just about every single missing persons case you can cover. People think that they see missing people and then they report it. Now, this is something a little more substantial because it was someone who knew Gary somewhat. But the issue is, there is a lot of evidence against it. As I've said in my other videos, if Gary did survive and got out of the mountains and just continued living his life, I can't imagine there would be any possibility we wouldn't know about it. While Gary was unmedicated, he committed quite a few crimes. There were other incidents where he did things that weren't criminally charged, but there are documented incidents of Gary assaulting people or getting aggressive. My point is, when Gary was not medicated, he couldn't stay out of trouble for long periods of time. He just couldn't. So if he survived and was on the run, how was he medicating himself? That would be pretty difficult. If he had no meds, at some point he would do something wrong and the police would get involved. If the police come, they would either arrest him or at the very least not let him leave without IDing him first. That has not happened. Gary has never gotten into trouble since the disappearance. The only way he could pull something like that off is if he somehow stayed consistently medicated all of these years. But how would he do that without the help of his family, whom he totally and utterly relied on? You'd have to say that the Mathias family somehow took him in and kept him under wraps for years, hiding him from the public and acting distraught for the rest of their lives, while at the same time somehow continuing to get his schizophrenia medication from a doctor. But even that story doesn't make sense, because if Gary is seen supposedly drinking at a bar, then that means the key missing person in a huge mystery is just out bar hopping on the weekend in and around the same town that he disappeared from. You know, I never like to eliminate a possibility completely, but I just don't see how this one works. I don't see how Gary Mathias could have survived this incident. The other big theory that is brought up in the film comes from a member of the Hewitt family and involves a man who was known as the town bully back in the day. Anyway, the theory goes that the bully and a small group of others like him decided to attack the Yuba boys, and they beat up Gary Mathias and they threw him over the Bidwell Bar Bridge. Afterwards, they chase the remaining 4 up into the mountains until their car gets stuck, at which point the perpetrators threaten or scare the boys into running up into the snowy hills on foot. The Hewitt family theory says that it was Ted Weir and Jackie Hewitt who made it to the trailer, and Jackie took care of Ted until he passed, at which point he left and died in the snow. Again, I never like critiquing any of the theories of family members. It always feels a bit insensitive. But I still feel it's important to discuss, as I think this theory has many holes. For one, why would Gary Mathias' shoes be found in the trailer if he was thrown over the bridge? The family seems to claim that the 4 remaining men had retrieved Mathias' shoes from him at some point and then took them on the journey up into the mountains. But say somehow they had Gary's footwear. In what world does one of the boys grab Mathias' shoes from the car as they begin their trek on foot into the mountains? Why would they want to bring them? And during the exhausting, nearly 20-mile walk, they continue to hold on to them? I just don't see it. If they still had them, they would have thrown those Converse shoes into the bushes after the first few miles. There would be no sense in carrying them all that way. They would serve no purpose. Mathias' shoes were not good in the snow or anything like that. They were just dead weight. And if those boys were chased up into the mountains by a group of bad guys, why didn't Joseph Shones ever tell that story? It would be an easy one to tell, and he wouldn't have to lie. He would look clean and probably even look like a hero because he finally had the answer to what took place that night. He would be the witness we so desperately need. He could easily pass blame off onto the town bully and others. He could say he didn't do anything because he was scared and he didn't want to get hurt. He would just need to tell the police that he saw a group of guys force the 5 men up into the mountains. The Yuba boys would have walked right past Shones. He couldn't miss them. But Shones never tells a story like that. In Shones' version, they all head back down and out of the mountains. The Hewitt family theory never accounts for Shones in any way. They never even mention him in the documentary, but you can't leave him out. Whatever happened to the boys, they still had to walk right past a man named Joseph Shones in order to get into those mountains. I can understand the Hewitt family wanting to believe that their relative, Jackie, made it to the trailer and that he took care of Ted in his last days. I can sympathize with wanting to believe that, but you have to recognize that it is basically a miracle that anyone made it to that forest trailer. I mean, just imagine trying to walk almost 20 miles in the snow and cold, in the dark, without wearing good cold weather clothing. It really is a miracle that anyone survived the trek to that trailer. When it comes to this case, I am in the minority of people who think that Sterling, Madruga, and Hewitt all died along the forest road leading to that trailer. Consider how much damage Ted Weir's body took just getting there. His feet were essentially falling off. He barely survived the journey. And if Jackie made it to the trailer, if he had done all of these things to keep himself and Ted alive for weeks, would he really just start walking back on the path that brought him there? It was about 20 miles back the same way, and he would have already been immensely weakened by months of starvation. To me, the most convincing evidence that Jackie Hewitt died on the way to the trailers is the physical evidence. When Jackie Hewitt's remains were found, they were completely skeletonized. When his shirt was picked up, his spinal column fell out along with other bones, so he was fully decomposed within his clothing. In fact, there was no soft tissue left on the bones according to the autopsy. Madruga and Sterling's remains were located over a mile away as the crow flies. Their remains were largely skeletonized, but both still had soft tissue. If the contention is that Hewitt made it to the trailer and stayed to take care of Weir until his death, then that would mean that Hewitt survived the same 70-ish day period that the coroner claimed Weir was alive. After Weir's death, Hewitt would wrap his body and then leave the trailer, walking back on the road for a few miles and then dying. His body would be found about a month later. But how then are Jackie Hewitt's remains just as decomposed, or in actuality, maybe even a bit more decomposed, than those of Madruga and Sterling? You'd be saying that Jackie Hewitt died far later than the other two, but his remains decomposed faster. I actually consulted with a couple coroners on this just to make sure my thinking was sound, and they both agreed. While there are plenty of variables when it comes to outdoor decomposition, it doesn't make much sense for Hewitt's remains to be more decomposed after a month or less than Madruga and Sterling's remains were after being out in the elements for over 3 months. So until I see some solid physical evidence that Jackie Hewitt was actually in that trailer, I'm going to continue thinking he died on the way there, but I will always remain open to the possibility that I'm wrong. Obviously, a lot of this is based on the estimates made by the coroner who observed Weir's body. And to be clear, this is how he reached that conclusion that Weir had been alive for around 70 days. First, he was informed that Weir had been clean-shaven on the day that he disappeared. When Weir's body was found, he had a full beard. The coroner measured the facial hair and found that most of it was 3 to 4 centimeters long. He then used a growth rate of 3 millimeters per week to conclude that Weir had survived for 10 to 13 weeks, or 70 to 91 days. Obviously, that is an incredible length of time. And believe it or not, the growth rate the coroner used is actually on the higher end of the averages, which usually range between 2 and 3.5 millimeters per week, meaning the coroner assumed that Weir's hair was growing pretty fast. I think it's a fair assumption to make. Things like hair growth rate come down to a lot of different factors. Genetically, if you look at Weir's male relatives, they're all pretty hairy guys. I could see them having a higher than average hair growth rate, but you might also consider that Weir was starving, which slows hair growth. Lastly, Weir's body would have been very dried out, which can sometimes make things like facial hair appear longer because the skin pulls back a bit. It's something the coroner likely would have considered if it was a factor in this case. The coroner was actually very thorough about this. In order to get the most conservative calculation he could, he took the fastest hair growth rate on record and used the shortest hairs that he measured for his sample to calculate a length of time equal to 8 weeks, or 56 days. But again, that calculation is under the assumption that Weir had the fastest hair growth on record and using the shortest hairs taken in the sample. But to boost his original calculations that Weir had survived for at least 70 days, the coroner observed that the extent of the decomposition on Weir's body was consistent with a post-mortem interval of about 3 to 4 weeks, meaning he estimated Weir had been dead for 3 to 4 weeks prior to being found. And remember, Weir had been missing for 100 days, so if you shave 3 to 4 weeks off of that, you get 72 to 79 days that he would have been alive in that trailer. I know, it's a lot of math. Ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to say is, it would appear that the coroner had good reason to believe that Weir survived for months in that trailer. It would appear that 70 days is not out of the question, as unthinkable as that may be. Whoever was with Weir was with him until the end, and that means they survived for the same amount of time. Based on all of this, I tend to think that it was Gary Mathias who wrapped up Weir and made the walk out of that trailer because he had a convincing history to support such a thing. Gary once made a 535-mile journey from Oregon to California by walking and hitchhiking. He didn't have any money, so he scavenged for food during that time. This shows that he had an ability to endure and some good survival instincts. Beyond that, there is physical evidence that Gary may have made the journey out from the trailer. Blankets and a flashlight were found half a mile to the northeast of the trailers on another forest road. Who else would have left those there but one of the boys? If you believe it was Jackie there and not Gary, then you have to say that Jackie climbed up the ridge, dropped the blankets and flashlight after finding a road, and then climbed back down to another road where he died. It just doesn't make much sense. A lot of people say that it couldn't have been Mathias taking care of Weir because he had schizophrenia and he no longer had access to his medication. I don't entirely accept the idea that someone with schizophrenia will automatically just go insane and be incapable of doing anything. Prior to his disappearance, there were a few times that Gary did some pretty messed up things when he was unmedicated. But as far as I know, it wasn't like every single day he was trying to burn down a house or murder someone. The only thing Gary would be responsible for while at the trailers is getting water and opening food cans. The question becomes, could a schizophrenic person do that, even on an inconsistent basis? I think they probably could. So while Gary likely suffered great mental anguish in those trailers, he would just need to keep it together enough to get water and open food cans. Obviously, the only thing we know for certain is that Ted Weir was in that trailer. But the best physical evidence of the apparent presence of Gary Mathias was his shoes. He left his shoes behind, likely changing into Ted's larger shoes because the frostbite on his feet had swollen and damaged them to the point that larger shoes would be more comfortable. I think the Mathias family largely agrees with this idea, at least according to their statements in the documentary. It seems like over the course of the weeks they were stuck in that trailer, Gary probably slowly started losing his mind. Eventually, Ted dies and is swaddled in the sheets. Afterwards, Gary walks out into the snowy abyss, dying somewhere in the forest north of the trailers, and even to this day, he still hasn't been found. This is probably as good a time as any to mention something else related to Gary Mathias. Recently, a Yuba County Five researcher named Anthony Dunn put out a $2,000 reward for anyone that finds Gary Mathias's remains. Obviously, if you were to go searching for remains in the Plumas, you should be an experienced hiker and one who is very cautious. My own journey wandering around the forests of that area didn't go so well. The discouraging part is that we really don't know how much of Gary would be left at this point, but maybe, just maybe, someone could come across something someday. Okay, so that pretty much covers most of the new information and theories that I wanted to go over in the Yuba 5 documentary. And if you saw it while already being familiar with this case, you might have noticed something important was missing. The name Joseph Shones was never mentioned a single time. I was rather taken aback by that. The only potential witness in the entire case, the man who many theorize played some part in the disappearance, and he isn't brought up at all. I really couldn't wrap my head around it, so I contacted a man featured in the film, Tony Wright, the author of a book on this case called Things Aren't Right. I wanted to ask him what he knew about the omission because I know I'm not the only one who was surprised. The Yuba 5 documentary on Netflix, that was a big thing. I remember getting a lot of emails about it when it came out. Took me a little while to actually get around to watching it. But a lot of the feedback I got, and I agree with it, it was like great to see you and so many of the family members on there talking about their experience, what the kids were like, and you just got a lot of information. But there was this one thing that everyone had the question for me. They were like, why did they leave out Joseph Shones? And I think a lot of people, they jumped to like kind of maybe, and I admittedly did this too, like some sort of malicious deception. Like, how could they leave that out? But you worked on this documentary, and so you had a lot of experience with them. So was there a more legitimate reason why it wasn't featured in the actual documentary?
I think it had to do with time. From what I understand, to get all the family members on air and to discuss the background and the case, I believe initially they were hoping to do that episode in two parts
Right.
for Files of the Unexplained. And there could have been a decision at the last moment, editing purposes or whatever. And some things just had to be cut. And
Right.
they just probably had to leave it at 45 minutes. And
Right.
that's been my understanding with it.
Probably
Um,
came from up top somewhere or something, I would imagine, huh?
yeah. And when we recorded the episode, when we filmed, it was February 2023. And I believe the writer's strike happened not long after
Hmm.
that. So I don't know how much of all of that going on in the industry slowed things down or changed things. Plus, there seemed to be like a back to work kind of thing for a lot of production companies, post COVID. And um, I know that they were hoping for um, a big episode, if not one, maybe two. And that's what I believe, like what you said, a decision from up top, and it had to be trimmed down, and it went to 45 minutes. Um, but I still see it as a great episode, as a way to introduce people to the case. And there's plenty of things they can watch, especially your videos.
Right.
You had the two-part series on the Yuba County Five case, and they can learn all about the case in the Mopac Audio podcast, and people like Drew Beeson, who has his channel, and Lore
Right.
Lodge, and some other people. I mean, Files of the Unexplained did a good job of opening the door to the case, saying this is what it
Right.
is. You can learn more about it.
Yeah, it was
Um,
absolutely beautifully done. Like
yeah,
beautifully done documentary. It's that as in terms of like a piece of art, it is like, really great. But just out of curiosity, I think you told me in an email you did like 10 hours that day just
yeah.
talking to them. And so in that time, do you mention Joseph Shones as you're just talking to them? How does that work? What does that look like? Are they just asking you questions and you're answering them and they're just recording and then they trim that down? Because you're featured on there as the Yuba 5 expert, which,
Right.
you are. You spent probably,
Yeah.
I don't, has anyone else spent more time with you? I don't know. But
There's a few people up there with me. Shannon
Drew,
McGarvey of Mopac Audio and Drew
yeah.
Beeson. Yeah. Um, you did a lot of work along with some other people out there, so I appreciate it. But yeah, it was a 10-hour day. And what happened was I was supposed to be interviewed for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And they said, hey, meet us at this house in Yuba City. We've got it set up. And it's where we're doing all the interviews with certain people. And so I said, cool, I'll be there. I got there. It was probably 10 a.m. We were done by noon. So we're eating lunch. And I met Tammy Phillips, Gary Mathias' sister, for the first time in person. We had talked over the phone and texted and emailed. So that was great. And they said, oh, hey, if you're interested, later tonight, we're going up to the Plumas, and we're going to try to get up to Rogers Cow Camp area. And we don't know if we can make it up to the fire base in Daniels Inc. area. Do you want to come? Because someone's going to be driving us up there and just kind of leading the way. And I said, yeah, perfect. That's fine. Let's do it. So I was done recording, and I probably got back to my hotel like 1 o'clock, and I talked to Gary Mathias' brother for a little bit. And then my phone starts ringing. They're like, hey, can you just get here now? We're just going to leave as soon as possible for the Plumas. I said, sure. The person that was supposed to drive him was sick, and they had to halt production for a moment. And they kind of stopped and looked at me and said, hey, do you know the way to the Plumas? And I said, yeah, I know how to get up there. I will drive. So they'd like mic me up and put cameras on me. And we drove up to the Plumas, and we spent a while up in that area near Lake Oroville at the Bidwell Bar Bridge. We got as far as Mountain House before the road was closed. And
Were you driving?
yeah, I was driving. So we had two cars. You said it was
Okay.
beautifully filmed. All credit to Sky Borgman, who was the producer. She did like Abducted in Plain Sight, and I think it's called The Girl in the Picture. She's done some Unsolved Mysteries episodes. So yeah, we were in an SUV driving up. So there's like a camera person next to me, one person behind me. The sound guy was behind me. And then like the producer, she was like in basically the trunk area of the SUV with like pillows around her, like directing the episode. And then there was a car following us, the rest of the crew. And so, yeah, we spent a lot of time getting up into the Plumas. And once we got, to the Bidwell Bar Bridge and Lake Oroville, we spent some time filming there. And then we got further up towards Mountain House. We did a lot of filming up there, which was really cool. And the thing about that shoot, there's bits and pieces of me in the car. There's bits and pieces of me up there near Mountain House, and it's pitch black up there. We had no cell service, and we were up there probably around the first or second week of February, and it was cool temperatures. It got dark fast, and we kind of got a better understanding of what it was for the guys that night when they were driving up into the Plumas. And the crew, I mean, they were just saying the same thing, like, these guys didn't get lost. There's no way. I mean, we're on this road, we're doing this traveling. We went through Oroville. I mean, they weren't convinced. And I'm like, I completely understand. And this is a mystery that's perplexed us for a long time.
So you're having conversations with the crew about what could have happened, that kind of thing. So I'm sure you guys probably talked about Shones during that time at some point, probably.
Yeah.
Huh? I mean, was there any?
I'm sorry. I think when they were interviewing me, he was brought up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the majority of the talk for me, I remember, was a little bit of background on the guys, and then the investigation itself. We really focused on the investigation.
Like, was there anything they told you we don't want to talk about?
Yeah,
the town bully guy, maybe, or something.
Yeah, they were kind of. They didn't say they had talked to anyone else about it, because I did. The day I arrived, I met Tom and Claudia Hewitt and Dallas Weir Jr., and we all sat down and had dinner. And I don't remember if Tom and Claudia had mentioned they talked about the town bully or not,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew we weren't going to talk about it in my part. They said, we won't cover that with you.
Yeah.
But that's where it was left. But I think things probably more Bigfoot, UFO kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
Like they weren't feeling that at all.
Right.
They were like, nah, we're not going there.
That makes sense. Yeah, because they did cover the town bully, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I actually really liked about it. You get a lot of the theories from the families, or what they think is going on, which is something else I wanted to ask you about, because I hadn't heard the Hewitt family specifically. They were talking about things that Jackie's father, Hewitt Sr., was saying, and how he said that he saw four sets of tracks in the snow leading up from the Montego and up into the mountains. Had you heard that before from the family?
Yes. So like you said, I spent a lot of time on the case. I spent about 4 years, and quite a bit of phone calls with the Hewitts, the Madrugas, the Matthias family as well, and the Weirs. The Sterlings have not been in communication with anyone, but talking with Tom and Claudia, they retained a lot of the information that Jack Sr. had given them over the years. And he said, 4 sets of tracks went from the Montego up the road. And in the police report, and I believe you had a copy of that as well when you did your series.
Yeah.
And I don't know if yours got redacted, but there is information, it's kind of buried in there, that there were tracks from the car, but it didn't say how many sets of footprints. Also, another thing is there were people up there the day after on Saturday. Right. Of course, Joe Shuns' wife and a helper. And then there was just some people up that way. And I actually have made contact, or actually if Drew Beeson and someone else has made contact with the guy who was up there the day after near the Montego. So we found him after the Netflix special, which was huge. So, yeah.
Did he provide any interesting tidbits you want to share or anything?
Yeah, he said, I think it was his, I don't want to say if it was his dad or stepdad, and his mom had a very colorful interaction with Joe Jones's wife. I don't know. He was young at the time. He said you could go up that road and you could get on like a snow tube or something and just go down the roads because they're so winding and mountainous. It was just a fun thing to do. And if you knew the spot, that's where you went. He says from what he remembers, and this was told to me from some other researchers, that either Cindy Shones, Joe's wife, and the person helping him were mad that other people weren't helping moving the car, or that they were up there. Something was just going on, and some words were exchanged. He he was doing his best to remember. He's like, I was the kid. I don't remember it that well, but I
Right.
do vividly recall there was an argument. And
Hmm.
that's about it. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. And one other question on the topic of Hewitt Senior. I think someone sent me this in an email because I still need to listen to the Mopac audio. I really should. I need to get on that. But I think someone told me that in the Mopac series that there was something from Hewitt Senior in there too about supposedly seeing some of Jackie's handwriting in the trailer. Is that true?
Yes. So that was in the Mopac audio. They were able to do an interview with Jack Sr. in person before he died around 2018. He did say that he saw Jackie's handwriting. In my conversations with Tom and Claudia Hewitt, they doubled down on that too and said Jack Hewitt claims that when he was in the trailer, he saw handwriting that Jack Sr. said he saw Jackie's handwriting. And also talking to Gary Mathias's sister, Tammy Phillips, she said she saw paper with Gary's handwriting on it. So
Hmm.
this kind of puts Gary, Jackie, and Ted in the trailer. So we definitely know Ted. We've got Gary and now Jackie. So, with the families and what they said, it's been consistent over the years. And if they firmly believe this, I mean,
Yeah.
they saw what they said, they saw what they saw. And
Right.
unfortunately, I don't think we have any clues left from the trailer. I think they've all been destroyed.
As I've always been a little bit skeptical that Jackie made it up there, and I know I'm kind of in the minority on that. But I just found it interesting that Hewitt Sr. he kind of has these tidbits of facts that aren't really in the report, because if the handwriting was in the trailer, a part of me wonders wouldn't that get back to Lance Ayres at some point? Because he seemed like a really dedicated guy, in
Yeah.
terms of doing this, and would he omit that if it existed from the report? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And that's the biggest blow that we've received doing research on the case, was finding out that Lance Ayres had passed away around 2013
Right.
and not having him. I think he was the ultimate knowledge of the case, and losing him, you lose information.
Right.
Another thing is the trailers in Plumas County. Could Lance have put something in a report and said that they found handwriting and it never got in? I mean, that's possible, but was it the responsibility of Plumas County to do the inventory of the trailer? But again, like I keep going back to this, shouldn't they have said something
Hmm.
about the information found in the trailer? All they said is they found C ration cans, cardboard, and paper. So in saying that they had paper, that should give you some kind of, idea. Well, maybe there was something on the paper, and because they were trying to get fingerprints off of anything, and they had little to no luck with getting latent prints, getting a complete print. Ted had so much frostbite on his hands that it just wasn't working, and they couldn't do it. And I don't think they were able to get Gary's prints out of the trailer for some reason. And then with Jackie, I don't think his prints were on file, so they couldn't have used anything like that, which
Well,
just adds to the frustration to the case.
well, it's funny how as time goes on, things still continue to happen, and it's like when you sent me that video of the Sacramento News doing a piece, and they had new photographs I had never seen. I
Same
don't
here.
I don't know if anyone had ever seen them, and it made me think, wait, what do they have that they don't know that they have that's in some, file cabinet somewhere? Because these were some pretty fascinating photos. Gary's shoes, some things in the
Yeah,
I mean, if they were taking photos of anything in the trailer, I would start thinking, what did they take pictures of anything that had writing on it? What else is there? It raises all
yeah,
these other questions about what could still be out there that could really add to the case, you know?
yeah. And whatever is out there, I mean, I haven't seen it. And when I saw the pictures, there were some pictures of the trailer, of the two trailers that I've never seen before, and the shoes, of course. So we started asking around, like, where did you? get those pictures. And we were able to get those of the shoes, because there's like a belt next to the shoes that if we can see in the picture. And with the trailers, we just kind of wanted some more information, like maybe who manufactured the trailers, because we just maybe wanted to know some schematics about the trailers, like maybe how easy it would have been to hook up the propane and get the heat on, and what other amenities were in the trailer that they could have used for.
I'm really curious about that too. You
Yeah,
know, yeah. Like how
we
easy was it, you know?
yeah, and we have some leads on it, but we'd
Hard to
love to
get.
get just to get the schematics, because I did talk to a person, and we're getting into the snowcat, who was with the Forestry Service, and they said that those trailers came down a year later, so they no longer
Oh,
exist.
a year
I,
after the disappearance they came down?
yeah,
Really?
so a couple of people have talked to me. They've been up in the Plumas area and they've lived up there, and they said, I remember those trailers coming down, and it was about a year later when they took them down. They said they tried to use the one trailer, but because of it being a crime scene, it just wasn't usable, and
Hmm.
they may have tried cleaning it and it didn't work out, and they had to come down. And so the trailers are gone. And I have been in touch with a photographer who's been up to the Daniel Zink fire basin area up there.
I know him. I showed me the
Oh, Levi.
photograph. Levi. Yeah,
Yeah,
his photos are going to be in the video. Yeah.
excellent. He's a great photographer, and he showed me the information or showed me the pictures, and it's really good. And I think that ABC 10 crew from Sacramento went up there as well and showed me a little bit of footage, and it was really neat. But still just getting information from people on the whole trailers and walking there, and the
Well, and
snowcats and everything. I mean, it just, yeah,
I
there's a
think
lot of
you
questions.
I think you mentioned in an email to me that talking to someone who used to work for the Plumas or the Forest Service, that you essentially confirmed that a snowcat did go up there the day before the boys went missing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have a source. I don't name them just because of their privacy. They just want privacy, and I respect their concerns. But yeah, they worked with the Forestry Service. They said the snowcat was sent up there Thursday the 23rd, because the trailer where they would eventually find Ted was brand new. They didn't want snow building up on the roof because they were having heavy snow. They wanted the snowcat to head up to those trailers, clear the snow off the roofs, and come back. So the station that they would have used, or the area, would have been around Mountain House.
Hmm.
That's all I know. And in talking to the person, I've been able to confirm that they had the job, they were with the Forestry Service. Um, they have a good reputation, so we know about the snowcat now. And from what I've been told, and I truly believe what they have to say, that the snowcat went up there Thursday, and if so, there was a path that the men could have seen and may have decided to follow if the tracks were visible, which may have given them some kind of hope, like, oh, we may run into someone. And of course, with the case now, there's a lot of people saying they did walk, they didn't walk, someone took them up that way. I mean, these are all theories we can explore, and I just tell people, leave enough room open with these theories to let us have these discussions, because you just can't slam the door on anything. So, but yeah, the snowcat theory, it's pretty well solidified at this point, in my opinion.
And how do you know for sure what at least what appears to be the boys' route, that kind of long route around the Granite Basin that goes to the trailer? I remember at least one newspaper source I read called it a paved logging road. Do you know, or have you talked to anyone about what that road looked like back then? Was it gravel? Was it paved? Was it dirt? Do you know?
Well, Oroville Quincy, the highway where they abandoned the car, wasn't paved at that point.
Right.
And some other people have said that. My source said that they would have chained off that road near where the guys abandoned the car. So they probably would have noticed that the road was chained off and they couldn't get past. As far as the side roads, I don't think they were paved. They could have been dirt gravel roads, but I have seen a
Right.
picture of that road and I can't remember if it was paved.
Hmm.
I saw a picture of the road in June leading up to the fire basin, Daniels Inc. area. It looked paved, but I need to go back and double check because there was still remnants of snow and it kind of
Right.
covered up the road. And I'm like, is that
Well,
paved or not?
that's why I've had trouble with it because with the Oro Quincy Highway only being paved up to a certain point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you have a paved forest road in the middle of nowhere. It seemed kind
Yeah.
of odd, you know. And so I always tried to seek confirmation on that. But to me, if I mean, when I went there, that road is definitely the nicest one in the area today. But we're 45 years down the line. Um, but to me, you know, if it was nice back then, if it was the nicest road for a snowcat to get to that area, maybe that would be the good path to go because there is that shorter path that kind of heads north, Forest Road, but even today I couldn't get down that one. It was so trashed. Yeah. So
Yeah. I had a lot of trouble getting up. I've never made it past what they call Merrimack area, which is near Rogers Cow Camp, because every time I've tried to go up towards the fire basin, Grant, whatever, Daniels Inc. area, the roads are closed or
hmm.
trees are down. One time was after the fires up there, and they said not to go that way, so it was just wasn't worth it. And then second time I was up there, like the road was closed near Mountain House, so we knew that was with the film crew, and we had no luck getting past that. But I think they eventually got up that way another day. I decided to make another trip, so. Yeah, it'd be helpful to know more about the roads. There's a lot of conflicting information in the reports, um, and that doesn't help anything. But I personally, I don't know if they would have paved those roads. I think because yeah, they're logging roads, but in talking to the people up there, it doesn't seem like they would have paved that area
Right.
at that
Right.
time. And so I'm just like, man, come on.
Well, it
That
could be
all this
something as
stuff,
simple as like, you know, a newspaper reporter is up there talks to someone and what was maybe like a packed gravel road, somebody just called paved and then that was that. You
right?
know, it could be something just like that. You're still promoting your book, right? Still out there.
Yeah,
Things aren't
I
right.
didn't think things aren't right. The disappearance of Yuba County Five, available
I'll,
at Amazon, and
I'll put links
um,
for it.
yeah, please and thank you. Yeah, so I've been talking to libraries and been at a few bookstores and um, some presentations here and there, and still have stuff lined up for this year, which is cool. I didn't realize how many people would be interested in the book, and happy to say I've had a chance to talk to libraries in person or through Zoom, and there's a lot of people who've watched the Netflix special and they've done their own research. They've picked up my book. They've listened to Mopac. I've actually met some people. I was at an event in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and there were people who had watched your video and they've watched the Lore Lodge and they were subscribers and they were super
Cool.
excited that I was on your channel. So it's great to know that you've got fans in South Dakota, and so they're very
Yeah.
excited about all your work. But yeah, and I'll
And
be
you're still continuing to research the case to, even despite the book being out now. Oh,
yeah, because there's a group of people, and I mentioned in the book like Drew Beeson. There's a researcher in the UK named Anthony Dunn. There's a researcher in Argentina named Eduardo Collea, and there's a few other people who are just kind of they kind of keep quiet about their research, but they've been a huge help as well. And we still chat about the case and still try to we find things like that are buried in either newspapers or archives or things like that. And so, yeah, we're finding out some interesting stuff that we're trying to tie into the case. And people have reached out to me who've lived in the area, and we get some interesting information from these people. So all of this is super helpful, but it just doesn't put all the missing links together. Like, why did they exit the highway?
right.
What got them up into the Plumas? We're kind of hearing some things that kind of solidify some stuff that we know, but at the same time, we really need more information. And it's good to know that other people are still researching the case. You're still talking about the case. Some other people out there I know are still talking about the case. I know I see people like the guys at the Lore Lodge still talk about it. Some people like TikTok and on Instagram still, reporting on what they've been researching themselves. So it's good to see people have not stopped trying to find out what happened to the Yuba County Five. It's still talked on Reddit, Twitter, other places. So the more people that are researching, the more information that comes about, new theories. You get a lot of people with different backgrounds who can share some ideas, and that's always helpful.
Right. Yeah. Just a few short years since I first released my couple of videos on it. I think I think I'll probably have to split what I'm doing right now into another two-parter because there's more stuff to talk about. Keeps coming out, whether that, new photos, the audio transcript we've been talking about, just, um, you know, things keep happening, whatever it is. So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
And that's what's good. People like I keep saying, they're researching the case. They're finding new alleys to go down, I guess you would say, because someone who's researching the case found there was like a logging dispute at the time, and I've talked to some people who were working up in the area, so we're finding some good things out. It's just we really just need to know what got them into Oroville and what happened in Oroville that led to that
Right. That
drive
really
into.
is. That really is the key, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've been able to get like a good lead on a person who may want to talk about the case, which is always important. I always appreciate someone willing to talk about the case on or off the record. And if this happens, I'll definitely let some people know, you included, if I can just get this person to talk. Can't say who it is right now because I don't want to.
I totally understand.
Get out to them and they're like, oh no, now I won't talk. So it's
Right.
like, okay, got to be quiet.
Well, I'll put your email in the description of the videos too. If people want to
Yeah.
contact you, if they got information, if they were living there around the time, anything, I'm
Yeah.
sure you're a
Thank you.
collector of information, so I'm sure you'd
Yeah,
appreciate it. So, um,
absolutely.
anyway, thanks again, Tony. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a good evening.
So I think we now have a good grasp on the Yuba County 5 documentary and the numerous theories presented in it. Again, it is a really well-made film, very professional, and I would expect no less from Netflix. It is a great way to introduce people to the mystery that is the Yuba County 5. There really is so much to discuss when it comes to this case, and fitting it all into a single hour would be difficult. I think with the release of this video, I'll have about 5 solid hours of Yuba 5 content on my channel. What the documentary really brings that is difficult to get anywhere else is the interviews with the families. They knew these men the best, so there is a lot to be learned there about the personalities of these 5 men. And of course, over time each family is going to develop a theory as to what happened. I may disagree with some of those theories, but in the end, I don't know what happened any more than the next guy does. All I can do is present my thoughts on any given theory based on the evidence we have at hand. And theories are very difficult to develop when it comes to this case, mainly because we have 2 very difficult questions to answer. Why did the Yuba 5 stray from their intended path of travel and head up into the mountains? And why did they abandon their car and walk up into the snow and cold? There could be one answer to both questions. Or there could be one answer to each. We really don't know. We have a set of facts, things we know to be true, and all we can do is really build around that. The positive news is that new things are being learned every year. We have the new Shones information from my last video. We have some new photographs that are important that were presented in this one. So even after all of these decades, things still move forward, even if they're moving slowly. Let me know what you thought of the theories presented in this video, or let me know if you've come up with some of your own that you think explains this situation. And until next time, thanks for watching.